All right. Well, thank you guys so much for being here. And the majority of the people in this room are graduates of either CCC program specifically and or the Power of Self, but not everyone is. So let me just give a tiny bit of some context for the people who aren't familiar with one of those two programs. So Power of Self is the program that Marcia Clark started, gosh, now back in 2001, really even before that from a design perspective. And Marcia and I worked together at EDS. And so I was on the ground floor building up that program, delivering it, and ultimately delivering it really all over the country and as far as Manila. And what CCC then became was a version of the program that was scalable to be able to offer to nonprofits and educators. One, because the timing was condensed down, it made it more affordable, literally from a tuition perspective, but also from a how much time can I give take away from work, family, all of that. And so CCC Leadership Program is that program. And within that program, we offer, well, really, I guess it's 9 days of content in class over 3 modules. And one of the tools that we offer in both Power of Self and in CCC is a couple different versions of a feedback tool. And so rather than reteach that or rehash that, part of what I wanted to do was introduce yet another tool to our toolkit. One of the things we talk about a lot is that good leaders are always adding to their toolkits. Great leaders know which tool to use when. And so today we're going to talk about a couple different approaches to feedback that I have learned in other programs that I wanted to share with you all, and then just a little bit of their background information. And so I managed to now lose, oh, there's my chat. Okay, so, oh my gosh, Virginia, see, one more thing we have in common. I love that. We'll have to catch up on that and find out more about you being an former EDSer. All right, so the power of feedback. I love this quote. Some of you may have seen it before. It says, there are 2 things people want more than sex and money. And the rest of the quote is recognition and praise. I mean, feedback really is about an opportunity to be able to recognize the good work that's being done. And even if the recognition is around effort and progress, there can still be, even with constructive feedback, there can be that element of recognition and praise. And so that quote comes to us from a more contemporary leader, and especially in our environment here in North Texas, Mary Kay Ash, who of course most of us recognize as the founder of Mary Kay Cosmetics. This second quote, and this is a whole, Power of Self CCC thing. We start all of our modules with relevant quotes. This particular one is a little more classical, and yet I thought it was perfect for what we're talking about today. And so it says, if you have knowledge, let others light their candles in it. So as you hear that quote, and it actually comes from Margaret Fuller, who is an author, a critic, a teacher from basically back at the middle to end of the 1800s. So with that specific quote, how do you think that relates to feedback? So don't worry about chat, just come off of mute and share, what does that quote have to do with feedback?
I would say for me, it puts it in a more positive light.
In what way?
So sometimes I think feedback, and this is more just on the receiving end of it, is that feedback often for me can feel like, here's what maybe went wrong or what I did wrong. And this just feels like feedback is positive and it's good and it's healthy and it's growth. So that's just, and it's contagious and it spreads.
Okay. Love that. Thank you. Who else? Anyone else see a connection between the quote and feedback?
I kind of think of it more literal in the fact that in darkness, you can't see and don't know where you're going, kind of like with feedback, with that lack of feedback, you don't know where you're going or what's wanted of you. So I think you can correlate it in that way.
I love that too. I love that too. I had never seen this quote before. And so I was just doing kind of, the random Google search quotes about feedback. And I will tell you, if you've ever done a quote search like that, a lot of times you have to scroll through. If there's 100 quotes, I will promise you about 95 of them will be by men. And so I'm looking for women's names, and this Margaret Fuller's name jumped out, and I loved the quote. And then when I went to go read more about her, I thought, oh my gosh, I love this even more, because even then, we have this quite formidable woman at the time who is sharing this perspective of, if I know something, and what feedback is it's knowledge, it's information. Sadly, feedback became synonymous with criticism, to Elizabeth's point, right? It became synonymous with criticism. And so it became this thing that became scary, which we're going to look at here in just a second. But I'm wanting to kind of reclaim that. And I'm wanting to reframe feedback as, think of it as information that helps to light a path, enlighten people, give them information that they didn't already know in order to build them up for some future new path. And when I think of it that way, I am much more interested in receiving it or giving it. So that's one of the reasons I love that particular quote. So, feedback does have a terrible rep. I mean, quite frankly, and there's it's one of those things where when somebody walks in, or if they ping you with an instant message, like, I've got some feedback for you. Most everybody, the first thing they do is cringe. I mean, rarely, at least I know in my experience, rarely do I go, oh, goody. I don't know about you guys. And so if we break this down, and this is where in chat, if you want to pull that chat box up, what is so scary about receiving feedback? Like, in your history, looking back over your lifetime, if you've not been a fan of feedback, what's so scary about getting feedback? So share your thoughts in chat. And if you can't access the chat, just go ahead and say it. Fear of being disappointed or disappointing others, both. For adverse reasons, like write-ups, right? They're basically just documentation. It feels like it's, just on the downward spiral. You assume it's going to be negative. I think that's true. I think most of us kind of go there based on our experience. Calls out our faults. We don't necessarily like giving feedback because we're afraid of hurting other people's feelings. It basically kind of highlights this feeling of, oh my gosh, I failed, and we're afraid of that. I don't know anybody that likes that. A feeling of finality, permanent definition of my character. Oh, ouch. Hard to face things that we're not doing well. Yeah. And so if we look at it, and somebody calling out, we don't want to hurt other people. So Lisa, let me back up. Lisa started us on this question of also, what's so scary about giving feedback? And so, why do we resist or procrastinate on giving feedback? So now it's on the other foot, right? Why don't we like giving it? What if I'm the one who's wrong? Great question, Amanda. It feels confrontational. A lot of people, personality styles, conflict resolution mode styles, they prefer avoid or accommodate. I'm afraid of their reaction because it's often been framed in the negative, right? It's just, again, historically not been a great experience for people. Any other reasons why we don't like giving feedback? Sometimes it just feels like it's futile because the behavior doesn't change anyway. And so why bother? So one of the things that, this is one of those responsibilities that we have, whether we are the individual performer, team player who needs the information, or we're the leader who needs to give it in order to achieve goals and outcomes. it is a requirement. It's an expectation. We cannot operate in the dark. As you said, we can't operate in the dark and expect great results most of the time. And we were just kind of stumbling and fumbling and kind of feeling our way. So Lisa, let me see, as a leader, when we give feedback, there are action steps that we need to follow up on so that it actually happens. Absolutely. And that's one of the models and one of the things I want to talk about today, to make sure that when we do give feedback, it's productive, it's handled in a positive way, and it has basically the structure that it needs in order to ensure that those steps for improvement are kind of built in and accepted, right? So another thing in researching for today, as I was out looking up some old, some data, one of the new things that I discovered was this author, Mitch Zenger, Zenger, and the link is there out there. He has a big body of work out on LinkedIn. And so this one, and I know it feels like, at least on my screen, I've got lots of stuff covering up the top, but it says Our Brain at Work. And you've got this model in your notes as well. And I loved this graphic, the way that he describes what's going on when somebody, messages us or sends us the email that says, hey, I've got feedback for you. And, our brains automatically kind of go to either, oh, good, based on our history with this person, based on the kind of feedback they've given us, or just sometimes based on our personality style, right? If we're more around positivity and the glass is half full and, we're like, oh, great, some information. Or we're like the self at the bottom there that's like, oh no, what did I do wrong? What happened? What's happened? And of course, for those of you who know me and my imposter phenomenon, that's me at the bottom. I instantly think there's something wrong. I screwed up. And so I go there. And what's actually happening is in our brains, it's a safety mechanism. And this is where Amy just, this is all so relevant for me right now, having just read or in the process of reading that, our body keeps the score, because your brain and your body has been holding on to all of this history of getting feedback. And if it hasn't been a great experience, you instantly get into this question of, am I safe? And the brain wants to protect you. And so the response then in that question around safety that's happening automatically, you can't control that question that happens in your brain. You get these kind of one of two responses. The one is the reactionary, I'm not safe. This isn't a safe person. This isn't safe timing. This isn't a safe location. Or this just isn't a safe situation, right? Whatever it is, it doesn't feel safe. And instantly, you almost can't help this. You move into defend and protect mode, which makes it almost impossible to experience this as light and grace coming at you. It's just like you get the shield up and you aren't in a place to hear it. Your frontal lobe, your prefrontal cortex, is not a place to process this as helpful information. It's a threat. Now, another potential response is where I can say, okay, I do want to include this information. I do feel safe. And so I'm more receptive. I can bring it in, lodge it in my logical brain, process it through even some emotion of, wow, I'm feeling really defensive right now. That's interesting. How fascinating, as we would say in our programs. Where's that coming from? Because this person isn't a threat, or I don't feel like my job's in jeopardy, or whatever it might be. And so this is all what's going on in the background. So no wonder something like feedback can instantly create that anxiety, all of the, sweaty palms, the heart's racing, all of that we go through. Now, I could spend the entire hour just unpacking Mitch Zenger's graphics on that particular link. He does such a fabulous job of then saying, well, what are some things we can do? First of all, what are the emotions that show up, whether it's guilt or shame or fear or anger or sadness? we could go through this entire roller coaster of emotions in this sense of, am I safe, am I not? And then he provides these considerations. If you are feeling sad, either as the giver or the receiver, I'm sad that they're not listening to my ideas and my suggestions. I'm just trying to make life better for them. Or as the receiver, I'm sad that they apparently don't like me. Why are they saying this to me? Mitch does such a great job of unpacking that and giving you from both perspectives what that emotional trigger might be and what is a potential way to kind of become aware of it and then make a different choice. So I highly recommend that you go check him out. But like I said, if I spent all day long talking about his stuff, we wouldn't talk about any other models. So any comments or questions about this idea of how the brain and body interprets that incoming message? Does that make sense to you? Not sure? Comments, questions? Thank you, Amanda. See, that was information that I needed. I was seeking. All right. Thanks, Kelly. Okay. Now, for those of you, this is probably unnecessary for most everyone in this room, but some people like numbers. And so there is tons of data out there that supports and reinforces why it's important that we do, especially as leaders or as people who are trying to create environments where continuous improvement is celebrated and reinforced. These kinds of numbers help you build your business case for trying to insist that feedback become a part of your DNA. Overall, and most of the numbers, just even over the past, really since 2015, are pretty consistent. And surprisingly, even through COVID, they've stayed pretty consistent. So no matter how you ask, most people want more feedback. So 65%, some numbers go as high as 72%, want more feedback than they're currently getting. And what we know is that the companies that do have a consistent process for providing feedback have lower turnover rates. For a lot of us in the work that we're doing, in the jobs that you're in, keeping those people connected and engaged is important to you. 4 out of 10 employees who receive little to no feedback are actively engaged from their work. So, kind of the bad news on the bad news is that they don't quit, they stay and quit, right? It's that silent resignation, all the different names that we've called it. So they stay and quit, and they just stay disengaged. So you're not getting the highest and best energy out of them, their best ideas. 68 or 69% said they would work harder. They would put more effort in if they felt like they were being recognized. So we're back to the Mary Kay, right? What they want more than sex and money is recognition and praise. No one asked me that question, by the way, so I guess I wasn't included in that survey. 43% of the highly engaged employees then are getting feedback at least once a week. So some of the other data shows that of the generations, the boomers, they are fine with kind of my yearly review, right? I mean, they're just part of the system they grew up with. I mean, they would like more frequent feedback, but if it really just comes in the annual review, they're okay with that. And if there's something special, something different, they want some feedback along the way. Then you start getting into more of the millennials, and now even with Gen Z, they do want more frequent feedback. And quite frankly, they could care less about the annual review, other than how it's tied to raises. They put less weight on that and much more weight on more consistent and frequent feedback. And so, the numbers are compelling. And if anything, it reinforces that as leaders, it's really critical that we do, in fact, provide that feedback. This particular data comes from an article, Caitlin Mazur, and there were quite a few other sets of statistics in there that she pulled in. And what she was also doing is linking to the sources that she pulled this data from. A lot of Harvard Business Review articles, just some pretty interesting evidence out there around that. Now, this was some other data, and I'm not going to, this is probably the last data slide in the deck. Now, I introduced you to Mitch Zenger a moment ago. His dad, which in fact, I'm messaging Mitch Zenger, like, I want to use your graph. And oh, by the way, are you related to Jack Zenger, like of Zenger Faulkner fame or Folkman fame? And he's like, yeah, it's my dad. And so then I had a starstruck moment where I'm like, I'm talking to, statistical royalty out there. But Zenger and Folkman, it's a consulting company, tons of research out there around employee engagement, HR practices, leadership. I mean, they've been out for a while. This is interesting. This data, this was in an HBR article. This research was probably done closer to 2015, 2016. That's around when this came out. And this is one of the trends that they were seeing. And they were saying, okay, so nobody wants to give negative feedback, but that's what everybody wants to hear. And this was, again, kind of across the board generationally. So leaders were saying, oh, very few were giving any positive feedback at all. Even fewer were giving negative feedback. But when asked for, I need feedback, surprisingly, more and more people were saying, yes, actually, I prefer the negative feedback. Now, here's my question to you. Either come off of mute and share or in chat. Why do you think people were saying that they wanted negative feedback over positive? Because it's a little counterintuitive. Why do you think those results showed up? Bingo, Dawn. People want to improve. They want to get better. They want to learn from their mistakes. It's an action item. And so it is this kind of compunction to either internal drive to want to do better, or if I want to keep my job, so kind of a preservation mode, if I want to keep my job, I've got to do better. And now this is what got really interesting, because then when I contacted Jack Zenger to say, hey, this data is 7 years old. Did you update your data? Because this was based on a database of about 5,000 people. And so I said, do you have any new data? And he said, yes, we've looked at about 9,000 more people, or 9,000 people total. And actually the top line of this says the feedback myth, or is it, what they're finding is that there was a little bit of expectation bias in the survey, where what they discovered is people were saying, oh yeah, negative feedback, because they thought that was the better answer, which I found fascinating. So he said it's not quite that kind of almost 2-to-1 ratio as it was with the larger group that they brought in. But it's still negative over positive was still higher. Now, he didn't get me the actual graph in time to get it into today's information, but he said, there was a little bit of that bias in there, an expectation bias, but also it did level out a little bit, but still higher. And it does come down to people, bottom line, want to get better. They want to improve. Whether they think that's the right answer or the genuine answer. The balance of both. I want to know what I'm doing right and what I can improve on. And that's one of the reasons why I love this model that I'm going to show you guys. So I got a quick question for you guys. Kind of, if we start thinking of feedback differently, we reframe how we think of it, right? It's a light that we're lighting, information we're providing, in terms of recognizing what people are improving in and their goals. If we think of feedback as a GPS system, why do we use GPS? I'm going to assume everybody in this call uses GPS at least for one reason. So in chat, why do you use GPS? I won't get lost. I want to get where I'm going, find the best route, help me get where I need to go for guidance, to avoid wrecks. I love it. Now, scroll back over those answers, y'all. Aren't those the same reasons why we want feedback or need feedback? So we won't get lost. So I know where to go. To find the best route, because maybe my leader knows what the traffic jams are and the obstacles, and right, gives me guidance, avoiding wrecks. I want to have some idea or expectation of how long this project might take me. I'm trying to get from point A to point B in my career, in my current role. This is why I love both of the metaphors of feedback. As a leader, I'm providing and lighting that candle, lighting that way. And in a more modern perspective, I am the GPS. It's non-judgmental, it's informative, and it's critical information to help people avoid wrecks, get to where they need to go effectively, efficiently, with the fewest derailments along the way. And so as a leader, it's not only my job, it's a service. It's a part of servant leadership, to be honest, is to step in and provide that important information. So if I reframe feedback in that way, normally it helps me feel a lot less anxious about offering it. And clear is kind. Oh, I love that. And I think we've talked about that before. This particular concept of feedback as GPS and comes from one of the groups that I work with a lot, Entelechy, and this is built into one of their leadership programs called Unleash Your Leadership Potential, and their website is unlockit.com. So I want to give them credit for that idea of using GPS as a metaphor. Now, this model, SBIR, is one that, for those of you who've been in the leadership training, any of this communication 101 types classes, you may have seen this before. It's been around for quite a long time. And I want to say Kim Scott in Radical Candor, I think I can't see myself right now. I got too many boxes open, but I think she refers to this as well. SBIR, for me, is one of the simplest approaches that gets kind of checks all the boxes, right? So, okay, good. Just checking our time here. SBIR stands for what is the situation, context for what's happening. What is the very specific behavior that the person is doing? And this can be used for both reinforcing positive feedback as well as redirecting constructive feedback. So what was the context or the situation? And then what was the specific behavior that the particular team member demonstrated? And this is my favorite part of this model. And the thing that I think gives it the most power. And it is, what was the impact? And you have to pick an impact that matters to them. So, if this is a constructive directive, so I'm going to make a request or a recommendation for a different behavior, I might be saying something like, when the impact of what you did was that, the team didn't get the deadline on time, or the team had to work overtime, or Joni had to work overtime. If the person doesn't care about the team or Joni working overtime, that impact lands flat for them. So I have to know enough about this person, their goals, what makes them tick, to find an impact that's relevant to them. So I want to give you guys a couple practice options here. So the first one we're going to look at is a scenario. We've got a coachee, an employee who had a high pressure presentation that she needed to give, and she knocked it out of the park, right? So everybody was engaged. They were asking questions. The data was presented in a way that made sense to them. And so using SBIR as our outline, knowing that I want to reinforce what all she did, this is an example of how that could go. Now I'm going to give you guys a chance to practice this with some constructive feedback. So it might sound something like, and I'll just use, one of you. So Morgan, I know that you were worried about that really stressful presentation that you had to give yesterday morning. And I have to tell you, well, first of all, regardless, I would say, hey, are you open to some feedback? Right? That's how I would open this up. And then let's say Morgan says yes. I know you were prepping for that really stressful presentation. And one of the things that I want you to know is through the whole thing, what I really noticed was how calm you stayed throughout the entire thing and so present. You had such strong, confident body language. I mean, you stood up there, you took your space, you worked well with the notes, you handled the objections from the group with credibility and data and great examples. And the impact of that, of your presentation, your preparation, the way you did it, the impact was that you, first of all, made a great impression because everybody was so engaged, and the leaders now have even more confidence in you and the project because of the way you did that. And I just want to say congratulations and good job with the amount of preparation and the way that you practice your presence in front of the room. So that is walking through. Now notice I did all the talking in that version. And you can, it took like what, 2.5 minutes. So if you're crunched for time and you just want to give somebody some laser feedback, you can knock it out using this formula, this format very easily with all the goodies in it. So SBIR provide you with an opportunity to make sure that in this case, it's recognition and praise around a specific task with the acknowledgement that moving forward, these are some things to continue, right? The things that she did well already. So now I want to give you guys a chance. Let's flip it around. So we have someone who, here's the next presentation, not going so well, too much data up there. People are not engaged. It's just kind of, he's off to the side, like lost. So here's what I want to hear. How would you describe and give some feedback, constructive feedback, using this model for that particular situation? So either come off of mute and share. Let's say, what would you share for the situation itself? Or you can also put it in chat. Describe the situation.
I'd be inclined to depersonalize it a little bit with the situation by saying something like, I know that presentation you had to do yesterday had a lot of really dry data, or something, like trying to set up the situation in a way that kind of took some of the heat out of you're boring and more of the content wasn't.
Well, and Amanda,
yeah.
even saying something like you're boring, right? Because when we get to the behavior, boring is argumentative. I mean, you as an attorney know, right? Where's the evidence of my boringness other than, so I've got to have some behavioral statements that I can ultimately get to that this person goes, oh yeah, I did that, or I didn't do that. So in yesterday's presentation with all of the data, especially if we know that's kind of at the root cause of what caused this thing to kind of derail, present the stance of the audience as data. Yes, that's also important evidence. So I love starting this off with, in yesterday's presentation where you had all of that data, right? Just something, that clear statement. Such situation, ask their opinion of the presentation to say, oh, Lisa, you're one step ahead of me. Save that thought for just a minute. Because right now we're using more of a tell approach as opposed to an ask approach. And I'm going to advocate that we balance both. All right, so now to Amanda's point, we're not just going to say in that presentation with all that data, you were really boring, right? We're not going to use that as our behavior. So what's a behavior statement we could use, or statements that is in fact on them? So who wants to be brave and give us a behavior statement?
I would probably point out there was too much information on the slide.
Yeah, which this person, assuming this person was in charge of the slide, in all fairness, it needs to be something they had control over, right? So in yesterday's presentation with all of the data, one thing that I noticed or some information I received was that there really was just too much information on that one particular slide, right? We can be even that specific. And I also noticed, let's say I could be in the room, I also noticed that as the audience was trying to absorb the information, you were standing off to the side, right? So these are observations. He can't come back and say, no, I wasn't. I'm like, yeah, you were. Then we get into the impact. So what might be the impact? And what might be an impact that matters to the presenter?
They stopped listening because they were watching.
They stopped listening, they were
Originally.
distracted. What else? I heard another voice.
Oh, I was gonna say the same thing. Basically, they were no longer paying attention. They were thinking about something else, probably,
Yeah.
not the presentation.
Yeah. The group's body language, not looking up, they were so focused on something else, but not the data. And because you were off to the side, I don't know if you noticed that. And this is where I love this addition. I don't think it was your intention to disconnect from them, but when you stood off to the side as they're trying to absorb all of this, it really then you lost the audience. And so then that's where, I can come up with a request, a recommendation, suggestion, whatever that might be. In the future, on that particular slide, I would break that up into 3 slides. I would, have it more interactive. I would do whatever that suggestion might be. That's where I get to the request. Now, this is again with me as the observer, leader, coach doing all the talking for the most part. And so then back to Lisa's suggestion, what I highly advocate is that you do more asking versus just telling, right? Asking them what they thought and then providing some insight, observations, other data on top of what they noticed. Now, if they literally, I say, so how did the presentation go yesterday? The one with, all the data. Oh, it was great. And either I was in there and I know it wasn't great, or I got feedback from people that it wasn't great. Then that's where I can start to ask, well, so tell me about the engagement level. Did you have 100% engagement? How engaged was everybody? Well, I mean, on the one slide, I think I kind of lost everybody, but it's a lot of data. Okay. So when now I can get to an impact question. So when you lost everybody, what's the impact on you or the result or whatever that might be? And get them to recognize that, yeah, to be honest, I don't know that I ever really got them back after that. I mean, they were so kind of out of it. And so I just felt really awkward. And I basically just said, okay, well, if you have any questions, just, let me know. So it probably didn't end well. And I certainly didn't get any questions from them. Okay. So knowing that you still have to present this data or similar data, next week in the update, what are you going to do differently? And if they, come up with an idea or two that's valid, then you just go, great idea. Yep, I think that will help. If they either don't have an idea or their idea may or may not really be addressing what seemed to be the core issue, you can say, again, would you be interested in an idea, something that's worked for me? I have a suggestion, and give them that autonomy and agency, right? So using still the same format, but coming at it less, here's what I saw, versus what do you think? What did you see? How did that go? Knowing that with some people, if that amygdala is still on fire and they're feeling judged or threatened by even this kind of conversation, they won't necessarily have the front part of their brain to process. So they won't come up with ideas So you may have to feed them a little bit. But the more you do this, the more that you're building that foundation, and it's going to make it easier for them in the future when you have additional feedback. And one of the things that also makes, and this is the Jack Zenger research, they're also finding that when you do give positive reinforcing feedback frequently on things that are relevant and that matter to them, to their development, to their career, when you do have constructive feedback, they see it in the total package as a leader who's caring about me, who's concerned, who wants the best for me, and it's a lot more palatable in that way. So comments or questions about the SBIR approach? And I'm curious, has anybody used this before? Is this something y'all are familiar with? Cool. Yay, Amanda. Good. I like it too, Morgan. It's so simple. Dawn's seen it too. Okay.
I will say I've used it in personal situations as well as work. And it works for both. So
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that that's one of the reasons I like it so much, because I mean, I'm not in a position to give feedback that often professionally. But I do give it as a mother of 4 boys and all the plus ones and all my community work. It lands a lot softer, I think, than some other models. And so that's one of the reasons I like it. Okay. Yay. Well, so then, oh, we kind of already did that. All right. The last thing I want to touch on, and then we've got some time for Q&A. So this is now Jack Zenger and his partner Folkman. One of the cool model or quotes that I saw out there when we talk about now modeling feedback, because one way that I create an environment where feedback is, people are more receptive to feedback, is if I model accepting and asking for feedback. And so I love this quote: feedback is not governed by gravity. What do you think that means? Any guesses? It's not hard and fast. It can be fluid. Ooh, I like that. You don't have to wait until there's a big problem to give it. In fact, it's better if it's kind of pervasive. And it's not always, it doesn't have to be heavy, and it doesn't always have to go down. Thank you. All of the above, right? And mostly when they initially used this quote, they really were trying to share the message, kind of, preach to everybody that feedback isn't just top down. If you want to have a feedback inclusive environment, you need to be just as open, receptive, and soliciting of feedback as everyone else. So you need to be asking your people for feedback on you around specific skills, around specific situations. And in fact, you can use that SBIR model. Yesterday in the meeting, when I opened it up with that icebreaker, I'm really curious, like what was the impact? You can ask the whole group, you can ask it in small people, but you model whatever methodology by asking frequently. And this is one of the statistics that is still pretty much valid based on their data. So, again, asking people, I want to say it's like 50 other markers for leadership effectiveness. So they get this leadership effectiveness score. And then one of the things they pull out is how often that the person asks for and acts on feedback from others. And then they created this, correlation graph. And so for leaders who are in that bottom 10 percentile of overall effectiveness, they also are the least likely to ask for and act on feedback from others. And it just continues, as you can see, those top percentile leaders in overall effectiveness are also the ones who are the most frequent to ask for and act on feedback from others. It's one thing to ask for feedback. People need to see you acting on it. Based on the feedback I got and the last, and not just waiting on engagement and pulse surveys. So how do you ask for feedback without looking like a needy female, right? And this is one of the things we talk about in our programs a lot. This is just a play on what Marcia has taught us all this time around kind of the I plus we equals. I love this formula. So one way I can get feedback, especially from above, without it looking like I'm being all needy, is to go in, whether it's in an email or a face-to-face conversation, with kind of this formula. Here's what was successful. Say I've got a project we just finished. I just ran a workshop. This is what I think went well. This was what I think was successful, and this was my role in that. Here's what I learned and would do differently. I'd make this adjustment next time. What do you think? What would you add to that? And so I'm not just going in and saying, hey, how do you think I did on that presentation? Right? It's, I just gave this presentation. Here's what I think went well. Here's a couple of things I would do differently moving forward. This is the adjustment I would make. And what would you add to that? And now they're a partner in that feedback, right? And so I don't want to put all the burden on them. I want them to see that I have the self-awareness to know what went well, what I would do differently, which is also a big part of the IntelliKey program, and having them participate as a partner in that. All right, so Q&A. We got 10 minutes. Let me take the slides off so we can see everybody. What questions or comments do you guys have? Or an addition, right? If you guys have a favorite resource, model, whatever, what do you want to add? Product placement.
Tracie, I love the cup. I find myself having consistent meetings with people on my team or somebody I'm giving feedback to makes it a lot easier. Then you're not having to send that messaging to say, oh, we need to meet. I already have that consistent meeting and I just feed it right in.
Love it. Yeah. Because sometimes it's that initial, like, hey, can you stop by my office? And instantly I'm like, can I do it right now? Because if I don't do it right now, I'm going to worry all day long that you're about to give me bad news, you know. But building it into a regular conversation, yeah, makes it so much more natural. I love that. Thanks.
I see there's so many organizations who do that, just formal once a year feedback. And obviously we are responsible as leaders to do it more frequently. But what can you say about that when you get to that end of the year and you have this form? One, have you seen organizations actually adopt this sort of model in their annual reviews? Or how can you sort of incorporate that in when you're stuck to that annual review format?
I will say, and this might be where a couple other people who have been involved in kind of HR at the high level of large organizations can weigh in as well. But with the groups that I work with most of the time, what we are really consulting them on is your annual review needs to be really accumulated, like here's all the things we've talked about all year long. And here's, so that it's really just a digest of all the things they've done well, the things that they've been improving on, where do we need to go moving forward? So it is not just SBIR, because that's too kind of spot working. But the annual review is no surprises. This is stuff we've talked about all year long. Here's the progress we've made on these things. And so it's almost like an annual report for the person of things they already know. So that's what we have. Thank you, Amy. I knew Amy would come to the rescue with some great resources as well, from a Forbes article. And any other additions then, as far as how you're seeing those annual reviews shift in approach, small steps along the way. Absolutely, Virginia. I mean, if people really are waiting for the annual review, I mean, you're so off. Think about your GPS system telling you now 100, miles later, oh, by the way, you missed your turn off 100 miles ago. Right?
Yeah,
Completely useless.
And the right conversation at the wrong time is the wrong time. And that goes with feedback as well. So if we're giving or receiving feedback in an untimely fashion, that's the wrong conversation.
Absolutely. So I'm noticing these resources in here. I don't know, is this one of those things, Elizabeth, where you can send maybe the chat to everybody at the
Yeah.
end?
I can do that. And I'm also pulling up the links as I get them. And so I will definitely be sending a recap to everybody. This has been awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we have just a couple minutes left in case anybody else has either a question or another resource. Anybody else? I will say, if you do not follow Kim Scott's podcast, of course, follow our podcast first, but if you have more time, Kim Scott's Radical Candor podcast I find it to be really, really helpful. But I kind of follow her philosophy. And so that's I love being reinforced, Anybody else?
The only other thing I would add, Tracy, and you kind of alluded to it already, but Marcia says this so much as well, is if you have to give real difficult feedback to someone, that you position it as, this is not going to be easy, but I'm doing it because I care about you and I want to help you do that.
Absolutely.
It just breaks the ice from the beginning because it's really hard for all of us to give difficult feedback. But if you position it in that light from the beginning, it's kind of that brain side that you showed. It takes away that that defend and what was the other word?
For me, kind of the two C's to start to open that conversation is care and confidence. Confidence in, I'm confident. I wouldn't be having this conversation with you if I wasn't confident that you could make these adjustments and make this work out, or that together we can get there, So I like putting both of those things together. I'm having this because I care about you, and I'm confident that we can get through this. Because quite frankly, if either of those two things weren't true, I wouldn't be going to the turmoil of doing this. Absolutely. All right. Well, we are now 2 minutes before the end. So if you don't have any other questions, thank you guys so much for being here. This hour flew by. I can't believe I had my little timing sheet and we were pretty much on it, but man, thank you guys.
It was so great, Tracy. Thank you so much. I love it. It was such a great session. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you guys for coming. It was so good to see so many familiar faces.
Yeah, it's good to spend a lunch hour on a Friday.
Yeah.
Good to hear. Thank you.
And I'll see a few of you, I guess, next month or whenever I see you.
April 20th to the 22nd is our next class 8 module 2. So.
Yay.
And we have more, we have another session lined up as well. So stay tuned for that. It'll be surrounding networking and LinkedIn and our professional network. So Heather will be back and leading that next month. So we'll get that out to y'all. So thank you so much for being here with us, and just love having you here. Love seeing y'all. It's been fantastic.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Great. I'm going to stop recording or you can keep recording.